They didn't expect you to walk away. They expected you to fight for a place they already decided to take from you. And the moment you didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't react, that's the moment their final decision stopped feeling like power and started feeling like a mistake. Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you flips everything you think you know about control. Most people believe the power move is convincing them to stay, explaining your worth, proving your value. It's not. The real shift happens when you do something they are psychologically unprepared for. You let them go, fully, silently, without resistance. And that breaks something deep inside them because now there's nothing left to control. If you've ever been in a situation where silence felt more powerful than words, pause for a second and reflect on that moment, because that's where your real power begins. Narcissists operate on an unspoken script where every action they take is designed to provoke a predictable emotional response. When they distance themselves, threaten to leave, or make a final decision, they are not simply ending something. They are setting a stage. In that stage, you are expected to react in a very specific way: confusion, pleading, emotional intensity, or an attempt to win them back. That reaction becomes proof to them that they still hold influence, that they still occupy space in your mind, and most importantly, that they can still control the emotional climate of the relationship. Resistance, in their eyes, equals value. The more you resist, the more significant they feel. This is why your acceptance disrupts them at such a deep psychological level. When you don't argue, don't chase, and don't try to reverse their decision, you break the expected pattern. It's not just unexpected, it's disorienting. Their mind is structured around cause and effect. If I do this, they will respond like that. But when that never comes, the entire framework they rely on starts to collapse. They are left without feedback, without emotional confirmation, and without the reassurance that they still matter in the way they assumed. This creates a form of cognitive dissonance they are not equipped to process easily. On one hand, they believe they are important and influential. On the other hand, your lack of reaction suggests the opposite. That contradiction forces them into a space of internal tension where their usual defenses, blame, projection, control, don't immediately resolve the discomfort. Instead of feeling powerful, they feel uncertain. Instead of feeling validated, they feel ignored. What makes this even more impactful is that your acceptance is silent. There's no argument for them to twist, no emotion for them to feed on, no narrative they can reshape to regain control. It removes the interaction entirely, and without interaction, their ability to manipulate or reassert dominance disappears. They are left alone with their decision, but more importantly, alone with the realization that their usual tactics no longer produce the expected outcome. Letting them stand by their decision strips away something they depend on more than the relationship itself: the ability to reposition, rewrite, and regain control whenever they choose. When they make a decisive move, it often isn't about closure. It's about creating a moment they can later manipulate. They expect flexibility, not finality. In their mind, they can always circle back, adjust the narrative, or pull you back into engagement once enough time has passed, or once they feel the absence of attention. But when you fully accept their decision and do not reopen the door, you remove that flexibility. You turn what was meant to be a reversible move into a fixed outcome. This is deeply unsettling for them because it eliminates their ability to control timing, access, and emotional direction. They are no longer the one deciding when communication resumes or when the dynamic restarts. Instead, they are placed in a position where their own choice has locked them out. This also dismantles the illusion of superiority they rely on. Their sense of being above the situation comes from believing they can leave and return without consequence, that they dictate the terms while you remain available. Your acceptance challenges that belief without confrontation. It shows, through action rather than words, that they are not the sole authority over the connection. That quiet shift in power is more destabilizing than any argument because it cannot be debated or reframed. As time passes, the weight of that realization grows. They begin to notice that nothing is moving in their favor. There is no emotional reaction to feed on, no opening to exploit, no sign that you are waiting. The control they assumed they had starts to feel like something they imagined rather than something real. And because they are now bound to their own decision, they cannot easily undo it without admitting a loss of control, which conflicts with the identity they try to maintain. Silence and non-reaction create a psychological vacuum that a narcissist is not prepared to handle because their entire way of relating depends on feedback. Every interaction they initiate, whether it's distance, affection, criticism, or a final decision, is designed to produce a reaction they can read, measure, and use. That reaction becomes data. It tells them where they stand, how much control they have, and how to adjust their next move. When you remove that response entirely, you remove the data they rely on to orient themselves. This absence doesn't feel neutral to them. It feels confusing and threatening. Their mind begins trying to fill in the gaps. Without your words or emotions to interpret, they are forced to guess, and those guesses often conflict with their self-image. One moment, they may assume you're hurt and waiting. The next, they may wonder if you've moved on completely. This inconsistency creates cognitive dissonance, a state where two opposing beliefs exist at the same time. They believe they are important and impactful, yet your silence suggests they are neither. Because they cannot resolve this contradiction through direct control, it lingers. Normally, they would provoke a reaction to restore clarity, reach out, trigger emotion, or create tension. But when silence continues, those attempts either don't happen or don't produce the expected result. The usual cycle of action and response is broken, leaving them without a way to stabilize their perception of the situation. What intensifies this effect is that silence cannot be argued with or manipulated. Words can be twisted, emotions can be reframed, but absence offers nothing to reshape. There's no entry point for them to reassert influence. This forces them into an unfamiliar position, where they are not directing the dynamic, but reacting internally to something they cannot access or control. Over time, this unresolved tension keeps looping in their mind, not because of what you did, but because of what you withheld. They interpret your detachment through a very specific lens, one shaped by their need for validation and emotional dominance. When you pull back without drama, without visible hurt, and without attempts to reconnect, it doesn't register as maturity or self-respect to them. Instead, it feels like a direct contradiction to the role they assigned you. In their mind, you were supposed to remain emotionally invested, responsive, and available. Your detachment disrupts that expectation, and the easiest way for them to make sense of it is to label it as indifference. Indifference to them is not just a lack of emotion, it's a loss of significance. It suggests that they no longer occupy a central place in your thoughts or feelings. For someone who relies heavily on external validation to maintain their self-image, this is deeply unsettling. They measure their importance by how strongly others react to them. So when your reaction fades or disappears entirely, it sends a message they struggle to accept, that their influence over you has diminished or even vanished. What makes this particularly impactful is that detachment is quiet. There's no confrontation they can argue against, no emotional outburst they can twist into a narrative that restores their sense of control. Instead, there's just absence of urgency, of need, of emotional dependence. That absence forces them to confront a version of reality where they are no longer the focal point, and that realization clashes with the identity they try to maintain. At the same time, they may attempt to protect their ego by convincing themselves that your detachment means you never cared, or that you are easily replaceable. But this is often a defensive interpretation rather than a stable belief. Beneath it, there is a persistent tension created by the mismatch between how important they believe they are and how little reaction they are receiving. That tension doesn't resolve easily because your detachment provides no material for them to reshape or control, leaving them to sit with a quiet but ongoing sense of diminished relevance. The lack of emotional supply forces them into a position they spend most of their time trying to avoid, facing themselves without distraction. Emotional supply in this context isn't just attention or affection. It's any reaction that reinforces their sense of importance. It can be admiration, frustration, confusion, even anger. As long as you are responding, they are receiving confirmation that they matter, that they can influence your internal state, that they are still central in the dynamic. That flow of reaction acts like a buffer between them and an underlying sense of emptiness they rarely acknowledge. When that supply is removed, the buffer disappears. There is no longer a steady stream of feedback to stabilize their self-perception. Without your reactions, they are left without the external reinforcement they depend on to regulate how they see themselves. This creates an internal void that feels unfamiliar and uncomfortable. It's not just silence from you, it's silence where their validation used to be. In that space, unresolved insecurities begin to surface. Doubts they normally suppress through control and interaction become harder to ignore. Questions like whether they made the right decision, whether they misjudged their importance, or whether they have lost something meaningful start to emerge, not necessarily in a clear or self-aware way, but as a persistent unease they can't easily shake. Because they are not used to sitting with that discomfort, their instinct is to escape it by reestablishing some form of supply. However, without access to you, that becomes more difficult. They may try to replace the supply elsewhere, but replacement doesn't always resolve the specific absence you created. Your particular responses, your patterns, your presence formed a familiar loop they understood and could control. Without it, they are dealing with both the loss of that loop and the exposure of what it was covering. The emptiness isn't something they can quickly fix or reinterpret, especially when there is no interaction available to help them regain a sense of control or reassurance. Your calm acceptance creates a shift that doesn't look dramatic on the surface, but it completely redefines where power exists in the dynamic. Power, in this context, is not about dominance or control over another person. It's about control over yourself, your reactions, and your availability. A narcissist typically assumes that power belongs to the one who can provoke, withdraw, and re-engage at will, while the other person remains emotionally responsive. That assumption only works if you continue participating in that cycle. When you respond with calm acceptance, you step out of that structure entirely. You're no longer reacting to their moves, which means they no longer have a predictable way to influence you. This is where the real shift happens. Instead of them setting the emotional tone and you responding, the dynamic becomes one-sided. They act, but nothing comes back. That lack of reciprocity removes their leverage because leverage depends on your participation. What makes this so effective is that it's not confrontational. You're not challenging them, proving them wrong, or trying to win. You're simply refusing to engage in the pattern. That makes it difficult for them to reframe the situation in a way that restores their sense of control. If you argued, they could twist your words. If you chased, they could pull away again. But calm acceptance gives them nothing to work with. It's a closed loop they cannot reopen without your cooperation. Over time, this forces a redefinition of roles. You are no longer positioned as someone reacting to their decisions. You become someone who allows consequences to exist without interference. That alone shifts the balance. They may still try to interpret, provoke, or test boundaries, but without your engagement, those attempts lose effectiveness. The power they once assumed was theirs becomes irrelevant because it depended entirely on your willingness to respond, and that willingness is no longer present. In the end, what unsettles them isn't the decision itself. It's the fact that you honored it without resistance. You didn't argue, didn't chase, didn't try to rewrite the outcome. You allowed it to stand, and in doing so, you removed the very mechanism they relied on to feel in control. What was meant to create leverage turned into something fixed, something real, something they now have to sit with. Your silence didn't weaken your position, it defined it. It showed that your value isn't something that needs to be proven through reaction or defended through emotion. It exists independently of their choices. And once that becomes clear, the entire dynamic changes. There's no cycle left to continue, no pattern left to repeat. While they remain focused on a moment they expected to control, you move forward without needing to revisit it. That contrast becomes the real outcome. Not a battle won, not a point proven, but a shift in direction where your energy is no longer tied to their decisions and their influence no longer shapes your response.